This episode of Remodel Revolution is brought to us by Total Air and Heat, North Dallas's premier heating and air conditioning company. Give them a call, 972-881-0020, or contact them at totalair.com today. John likes to talk. He's chatty. And that's what I like about it. How you doing?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, hear you fine.
Awesome.
Hear you fine.
Hey,
how you doing?
Thank you. I'm great, Alex. Thank you for having me on and tolerating my loquaciousness.
Your loquaciousness. So, you tell us about Revel Floors, or Revel Woods, which is your company, and give us a brief overview of what your expertise is.
Sure. Yeah, happy to. So first, thanks for having me on. Super excited about this. And so Revel Woods was started a couple years ago. We were originally a part of our parent company, which is a wholesale wood flooring distribution company. And we had the idea of, look, the industry's been so old and the supply chain has run a certain way for so long that it was going to change. So rather than prepare to be disrupted, our thought process was, let's think of what this could look like in the future and create kind of a sales model that fits that. So Revel Woods was started. There was a group of us, and we got together, pulled our resources, and figured, let's see what the future of this industry could look like and create the tool that would help usher that in.
Because there's been so many changes in the building industry. There's been a lot of changes in the consumer and a lot of so much information coming to people. But the biggest thing that I've seen is the change in the manufacturing process of floors, because your flooring, wood flooring in particular, used to be just solid wood floors. That's, of course, I'm a little bit older than you. And so when I grew up, we didn't have engineered flooring. We just had solid wood floors. But now it's really gone leaning really stronger to the engineered wood flooring part of the process. So tell us, what is an engineered wood floor? What is that wood plank made of?
So that's a great question. And I might zoom back a little bit to talk about, there are technically 3 different types of wood flooring that is classified real wood floors. So originally, when you think is this a real wood floor or not, one would assume that would be self-evident, but it actually isn't. And there was a company that I won't name specifically, but a large company that started a couple of years ago selling basically a laminate product, which is not a real wood floor. It's a picture of wood with sort of some kind of composite high density fiber core underneath it, and then a coating on top. And they were calling that a real wood floor because the picture was printed on effectively paper, which is a wood byproduct. So it's a little bit like calling a hot dog fillet, because there might be some fillet in there.
Because it might have come out of the right end of the hog. Okay.
Right, exactly. Or raccoon or whatever.
Right.
So what that did, though, is it prompted the National Wood Flooring Association, of which my father actually is currently chairman of the board of directors, to define what real wood floor meant. And so what happened is they came up with, and it's kind of controversial, which one would think wood flooring shouldn't be. It should be like the least controversial.
Came out of a tree
in the world, but we did it. We accepted the challenge. We were going to find some controversy, and we did it. So take that, haters. We can find controversy in anything. But here's the official definition. Is basically divided into 3 different categories. So the first one is what you were kind of just talking about in solid wood flooring. These names are not very creative. So solid wood flooring is every floor plank is made of a single solid piece of wood. So that's kind of what people think of when they say real originally. And I'm using air quotes because it is considered real, but it's not the only thing that's considered real. So solids have some advantages. They have some disadvantages. Particular disadvantage is because wood is hydroscopic, meaning it move water through the tree, it reacts very much with moisture. So that whole board, every plank in that floor is going to move as one big piece as it expands and contracts with the seasons. And so as a result of that, we don't recommend wider planks in solids. We don't recommend certain substrates or subfloors or in-floor heating underneath solids because they react quite a bit more. The second category is what you were just talking about with engineered wood flooring. Engineered wood flooring is so if it's a white oak engineered, let's say, the top layer is real white oak. And then underneath that is different levels of other species of wood. They can be plywood, it can be some other different things. But they run sort of perpendicular to each other. So wood wants to expand and contract along the growth rings, which is where the grain is. So what they'll do is the top layer wants to expand horizontally, let's say. It's all horizontally, but left and right. Then the layer underneath is going to want to expand and contract the long ways. And then they keep alternating them, and then it's glued together. And so what that does is create a tremendous amount of dimensional stability. So one of the advantages for engineered wood flooring is that you can do a much wider plank and longer length, and that floor is not going to move nearly as much, if at all, as the equivalent would be in solid. So engineered technologies come a long way. Originally, it was like a thin layer on top that, was used to just cut costs. And then they would put some kind of plywood underneath it and they would sell that. And then you could have a real wood floor. Now, though, a lot of engineered, depending on the thickness of that top layer, it can be refinished as many times as a solid because you can only go down to where the tongue and groove is.
Like an eighth of an inch.
Yeah. And then so it can mitigate a lot of the advantages that solids have with a higher end engineered. So they're not always less expensive. In some cases, they can be actually quite a bit more expensive. Mm-hmm. Then the third one, and this is the one that got people really upset, is called composite engineered. And this technology is relatively new. And what that means is the top layer is still wood. It's a real piece of wood. So if it's white oak or maple or whatever, you have a real piece of maple. But underneath that is some sort of either wood byproduct like high density fiber or medium density fiber, or in some cases now they're using composite type cores like WPC, which is waterproof core, PVC.
Like a rubbery kind of.
Yeah, or almost like what you would see in a vinyl, except that like a rigid core vinyl plank, except that instead of it being all the way vinyl, that top visual layer is still wood. Mm-hmm. And so that, has raised some controversy within the industry, but currently the definition is based on the visual. So when you look at a wood floor, the surface you're effectively walking on, that knot that you see in there or whatever it is, a grain, is that a real knot from a real tree or is that a picture of it or a recreation of it?
So as all things in our society now, we're adding an extra gender.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. So as with technology, I guess. So we are kind of trying to keep up with the times and make sure our definitions fit and that they're defendable. So a laminate, for example, is not considered real wood because a laminate floor is a picture of wood over a core, some type of composite or fiber core backing.
And that's sort of what that sort of got this whole thing started about 25, 30 years ago, was the laminate flooring that you could buy at the big box store that was real inexpensive, and people could go in and do it themselves, snap it together, put it on the floor. But by gosh, if it got wet, bye-bye.
Right. So the laminate technology's improved. It can get a little wet now, but it's not, it's still, from a visual standpoint, it's the visual that you're seeing is not a real piece of wood. It's a picture of it. So that's the difference between, everybody kind of lumps, not everybody, but there's a section of the population that lumps laminate in with engineered, and they are technically two very different things. So an engineered wood floor will still raise the value of your home the way a solid will at the same rate, which most realtors will say is anywhere between 5 to 10%.
So when people are trying to make a selection on engineered flooring, one of the things that I tell all of them is hold that thing up, look at the edge of it, and look at the thickness of that top layer of wood. Is that the advice? Is that good advice?
It is good advice, but it doesn't always tell you everything you might think it's telling you. Like everything, this is actually fairly complex. So the thickness of that top layer determines only whether or not it can be refinished multiple times. So in some cases, yes, you're going to want something that can be refinished multiple times, but not always.
Right.
Sometimes if something is that top layer is hand scraped or textured in a very specific way, it's going to wear better and last longer already. And you may want to just apply an additional coat of finish, or if it's an oil, just keep it oiled, because as it wears, it's going to improve the look and you're not really going to sand it. So you're basically in that situation, if you had a much thicker top layer, you're paying for a sports car with an engine that will go 3 times the legal speed limit. It's nice to know it can go that fast, but you're never going to drive it that fast.
Right.
So
Right.
you're paying for something you don't actually need. One of the other disadvantages of that, just to keep in mind, sometimes with a wider plank, if you do something that is thicker than a 4 millimeter top layer, like a 6 millimeter or something, you think, wow, this is really good quality. But with that wider plank, that's more area for the wood to change with certain dramatic, climate changes,
Expand,
and
expand,
it
and
can pull
contract.
itself apart.
Sure. Yeah.
And
And I've
we've seen
seen that
that
happen.
happen.
Yeah, I've seen that happen. And a lot of one of the big advantages to engineered flooring is the finish that you get on it. Let's talk a little bit about the finish that I can't give you the quality of finish normally on a job site that you can get in a factory finished floor.
That's definitely true. And that's just a matter of finish technologies. And so one of my last jobs, I actually sold flooring finish. So spent a lot of time understanding the chemistry of that and everything. And it was really interesting. But when you think about an on-site finish, you're only going to be able to apply about 3 coats. It has to be engineered in a way that it will dry and cure in most in-home conditions around the country. So you have to be able to, whether it's winter in Wisconsin or summer in Arizona, it has to be able to dry in most of those conditions. The other thing too is with the factory, you have ideal conditions, so you're controlling the climate, the humidity, and then you also have the ability to UV cure it. So factory finishes require special machinery to cure. It cures instantly under intense UV lights. It comes down this really long line. And then when it's done, you can put it in and it's fully cured. Whereas site finishes actually require, in some cases, an additional 7 to 30 days
Mm-hmm.
till that floor will be dry, but it has to be cured.
Well,
So
like anything liquid, even concrete, any finishes, paint, anything that we put on a surface liquid, it requires a certain amount of time to actually get hard. And just because you can touch it or walk on it on your socks doesn't mean it's cured.
exactly. So the second you can have something that's dry and you can walk on it and you won't leave any footprints, but the second you start moving furniture, you're going to gouge it.
Right.
And so site finished in general, they just don't. It's not impossible, but it's very very difficult to create something that's that strong, in that still behaves in a way that you can apply it right. So there's always that balance. Whereas in a factory, it comes down that line. It's designed to perform. They don't have to worry about how do we apply it properly and open coat time and what is the humidity in the room. They have all that controlled.
One of
So
the
they'll get
things,
10 coats and they're cured immediately.
sorry to interrupt you. One of the things that I really love about engineered flooring is your ability to have a lot more selection in the wood species. We down here, we were always oak. It was oak or pine. That's all we used for years. I don't know if it was that way all over the country, but it was here. And now with engineered flooring, we can get exotic woods, and have our floors all kinds of stuff.
Oh yeah, yeah. You can get unfinished as well in different
Yes.
species.
Yeah.
There was a time in the '90s where Brazilian cherry cost less than oak, and that was due most. I mean, there were a number of factors, but predominantly it was due to improper forestry management in South America. So now that they put the kibosh on some of the things they were doing down there, the price kind of went back to where it should be. But there was a time where exotics were very popular in the
Mm-hmm.
United States. The domestic species now are still more popular. They're a little more sustainably harvested, and you can get It's just the look is what a lot of people are going for right now.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about something that I know that see a lot more than I do, but people just love wood. What is it about wood floors that make people feel great when they walk
Oh
in there?
man, I love that question, and I wish more people asked it. The so There's a number of theories behind this. Effectively, though, wood is the aspirational product. We have done the research at the National Wood Flooring Association, where we asked people, if you had your dream home, budget aside, this is your home. You make it however you want it. What is your ideal flooring in there? And it was like 79% said wood, and tile was number two, I think, with like 13% or something
Mm-hmm,
like that.
mm-hmm.
So that was what people wanted, wood. It's why vinyl looks like wood. It's why laminate looks like wood. I mean, if you're making vinyl, you can make vinyl look like whatever you want.
Right.
And there is some vinyl that looks like tile. I don't want to say that doesn't exist. It absolutely does. But it's predominantly wood. And I think, and this is me, I've seen some studies on this, but this is more just me waxing philosophically. There is something to be said for a connection to nature and to natural products.
Exactly.
And there's
Mm-hmm.
something about that provides a sense of peace, sort of subconsciously, when you're surrounded by wood versus when you're surrounded by plastic.
Well, and the other thing is that even if you go in let's just say you go in a building, a commercial building, and it's got all these white, nice marble floors. So the first thing people say is it was pretty, but it's cold. You know, it doesn't have that feeling that of warmth that you get with wood floors. So I absolutely agree with that assessment.
Yeah, I agree with that too. And I think with some even the lookalike products, there's a sense of environmental responsibility that comes from wood. Our life cycle analysis, carbon sequestration analysis, all of that in wood is just beyond, nothing is even close to that as far as if you care environmentally, what you put in your home, from a safety aspect, all of that. It really makes a huge difference. And in longevity, wood lasts a long time. Even if you have something in there designed not to be refinished, it's going to look better as it ages, like genuine leather versus polyester.
Sure.
So
Wait a minute. I like polyester.
Polyester has its purposes. So there is. I'm not saying that leather. You should only wear leather in every situation where you otherwise would have worn polyester. Because I wouldn't recommend working out in a leather jacket. But there's a time and place for this. If you want polyester to look like, you're going to wear polyester to a formal event.
I had some nice suits in the 70s, and they were all polyester, and a nice big open collar, and I was a rocking dude.
And you kind of took them home to your shag carpet, and
I had long hair.
Nice. Yeah, no, there is a time and place for all of that, and there is, wood is not the best material for every single situation.
Okay, so one pet peeve I've got about engineered flooring is how people are installing them. And on my YouTube channel, I have several videos of one particular house where we pulled the engineered floor up that had been glued down, and I walked in the house and glued down to a slab. This is what I'm referring to. And the slab had a lot of moisture coming up through it, and I could actually see the effervescence coming up in between the wood slats. And when we pulled it up, of course, there was a massive mold issue underneath it where for years moisture had been coming up through there. And I have told people always, if you have the option, you should do a floating floor, not glue it to slab. I've had experiences where the wood will cup, it'll get damaged, brand new Brazilian, the Brazilian rosewood or whatever that was one of the first ones I saw in a house many years ago, and it had just cupped. It wasn't 6 months after they put it down, and I've seen it repeatedly. So, what is your opinion about whether or not people should glue or float an engineered flooring?
So your experience is fair. The one you just described is common and does happen a lot. I will say this, usually we default to the NWFA or National Wood Flooring Association installation guidelines for these kinds of things because it is possible under certain conditions. So it's hard for me to say this will never work or this will always work. But the guidelines in there are pretty specific. If you are going to glue to a slab, there's certain moisture type of glue that's approved. You have the concrete has to be at a certain moisture level. All of that has to be tested. All of that has to be recorded, because God forbid you do have a problem, you're going to have to be able to back up why you did it,
Right.
and what it was like when you did that. I mean, concrete, it's a weird kind of substrate, right? Because it feels dry, but it can actually be wet forever, right? I think in the center of the Hoover Dam, the concrete is still wet.
Well,
So,
no, I mean, concrete takes 70 years to cure. It actually never cures. It actually always stays in technically a liquid form. But the problem is a concrete slab is just like a sponge. And if there's ground moisture underneath it, and it's not only the ground moisture underneath it. Now, down here where we have forced air conditioning, we're introducing moisture into the air of our homes. And so that floor, regardless of what kind it is, whether it's engineered or solid wood floor, is getting bombarded on top in the little lines between the slats, the little reveals, and all of those things, and from underneath with moisture. So moisture coming out of the slab, moisture on top, and it does. Sometimes it just doesn't stand a chance.
No, it doesn't. And in those situations, I agree. I mean, I would not move to gluing it down to concrete immediately. Usually that is what's common in that case is you put a pad underneath that, and then you can edge glue it as you float it. But it really is situational, and I would definitely consult the National Wood Flooring Association installation guidelines. But what you're talking about, though, in a broader sense, is always make sure you understand exactly what you're about to do,
right,
and why. Because
right.
if you install it incorrectly, legally the onus is on the installer, not the manufacturer.
Well,
so the manufacturer can only make product that will do a certain thing. They're not going to be able to come back and say, look, this was never approved to just be installed any way you felt like.
And the problem is that, of course, I wouldn't expect a homeowner to know the difference. They hire somebody, they put it in, and the only way that floor guy knows how to put it in is with glue. I keep experiencing this, and I lecture them, and I tell them, don't do it, and they do it anyway.
Yeah, well, it's an expensive mistake, though.
If
you have a multi-$1,000 claim and an inspector comes out and looks at it and says, look, this was never approved for the installation of this method. Why did you do it this way?
Exactly.
And the onus ends up being on the installer, and that's a tough pill to swallow. A lot of guys that I know installing, my father used to be an installer, so we know this, like smaller solopreneurs, or maybe you got a couple guys working for you, they're not going to be able to shell out a $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 claim. That could really hurt them. So it's really important. The old phrase is what? Measure twice, cut once.
Right.
So, and that's true. Just make sure you know when you're installing something. And that's one of the things we offer when we work with our installation partners. If they've got a question on something, we work with them directly and say, look, this is what's recommended. This is what's not recommended. We'll help in any way we can, but we would love to get that call before it goes in, not after.
Yeah, right. Wow, John, I really appreciate you spending some time with us this morning. It's been really, really a pleasure, really informational. I really appreciate it so much. We're gonna
pleasure was mine.
I think we ought to do this more often, and we'll keep covering more ground with it, because there's really a lot more to talk about when we talk about wood floors. Thank you so much.
Great. Well, thank you. Anytime.
Okay, John Dupra with Revel Floors.